I do remain concerned that while expressing satisfaction that Japan may accede to the Hague Convention, the current 123 active cases involving 173 American children would not be covered by the treaty provisions. So while I appreciate Secretary Campbell's obvious empathy and compassion for the children and the left-behind parents, and I'm encouraged that efforts will be made by State to, quote, resolve existing child abduction cases and allow parents currently separated from their children to reestablish contact with them and ensure visitation rights, the exclusive emphasis seems to be only on visitation and access and not return. To that end, I and many others urge the Obama administration to negotiate a memorandum of understanding or a bilateral agreement with the Japanese to ensure that the 123 left-behind parents and counting, because that number is likely to go up perhaps significantly before it is ratified, are not left behind a second time, this time by treaty promises and provisos that won't apply to them. Last week, I offered an amendment to the State Department reauthorization bill, backed by my good friend and colleague, Mr. Payne, and really the entire committee. Howard Berman spoke very positively of it, as did Chairwoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, that expressed the sense of Congress that the United States, by way of memorandum of understanding with the government of Japan, and through all appropriate means, should seek the immediate return of all United States children wrongfully removed to or retained in Japan. Delay is denial, and it does exacerbate the abuse of a child and the agony of the left-behind parent. Because the Hague Convention, again, specifically precludes its protections to all existing abduction victims, entry into force, sans an MOU, will likely produce or result in lost momentum and no return of current abducted American children. It is on behalf of left-behind parents, in recognition of the extreme pain they suffer as victims, and in recognition of our own duty as the U.S. government to help bring these kids home, that we hold this hearing today.
Congress has recognized this problem and passed H.R. Res. 1326, which called on Japan to join the Hague Convention and to return American children.
This is an issue that we need to be shining a light on.
We sometimes, I think, hold back in using our legitimate moral authority because we worry about somehow alienating other countries. Now, I want America to be reasonable and fair in its dealings with other people, but as a general rule, it does seem to me that most countries in this world need us more than we need them. I don't want to abuse that, but I think we sometimes assume that we can't press hard because people will get mad at us. Well, if I were many of these countries, I would be more worried about America getting mad at them. And again, I don't say that to the extent that we should be bullies or that we should be overly aggressive. I do think, however, that a reasonable assessment of what the relationships are should allow us to press cases on their merits and not be held back by some fear that we will somehow lose influence. I do not see any reason why American citizens seeking justice, especially in the most sensitive possible area, parents seeking justice with regard to their own children, I cannot think of a diplomatic reason in the cases I have seen that ought to retard our efforts.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Payne, your leadership and involvement in this area strengthens the U.S. government's message to foreign courts and central authorities in long-standing abduction cases. Unless we succeed in returning a child to the United States, we have not been successful. We are fully committed to serving left-behind parents and children who are the victims of this crime. I've met with many left-behind parents, some of whom are here today, and I have been deeply moved by their stories. I want to reiterate to them and to you that we will never forget our duty to serve each of our citizens and, most importantly, our children.
This is a human tragedy that unless you experience and have a chance to get to know these brave parents, it's just impossible to imagine. I can't imagine how they go on, to be perfectly honest. And every single one of them has demonstrated the kind of courage that I'm not sure I myself would be able to summon in such a circumstance. And frankly, I need to underscore that bringing attention to this issue is important. Our most important relationship in Asia, by an order of magnitude, is with Japan. The U.S.-Japan security relationship is of utmost importance. And I stand really next to no man in terms of my commitment to this relationship. I will do anything to preserve a strong relationship between the United States and Japan because I believe it is in our mutual interests. We anticipate when the Japanese leader visits in September that we're going to see a big step forward. This is not easy work. It's painstaking. I also understand and appreciate the profound impatience. You want to get to this and try to see immediate progress on these specific cases. I'd also like to say this very carefully and directly. We have not ruled out any other legal process. We've not ruled out anything in our overall approach. I still think the process has gone too slow. I'd like to see it speeded up, and frankly, one of the most important things that we can do on this issue is to increase awareness in Japan and to make clear that there is that Americans are a patient people, but we also have our limits, and that while our preference is to solve these issues in a way that deeply respects the national dignity, the cultural sensitivities of all involved, we do reach points in struggles where we have to look at other means, and we are approaching that situation.
I hope the Japanese government gets that. This is not going away. It's only going to get worse in terms of congressional scrutiny. 2 weeks ago, a group of parliamentarians were here from the Diet, and they asked that we withhold food aid to North Korea because of what? Abductions. And I'm with them on the issue of abductions, whether or not food aid is the proper way because of starvation that is massive in North Korea, whether or not that's a way of, I would argue it's not, but still their point about abductions, I agree 1,000%. Well, apply that equally to American left-behind parents. And finally, if you would, Dr. Campbell, if you could speak to the issue of a sidebar bilateral agreement and a MOU, which, again, this committee went on record recently as last week calling for that. I hope that we do it on the full floor of the House. It seems that there may be no other way. I know your intentions are absolutely pristine and good, that maybe the atmosphere may open up the possibility, but I think the day that ascension occurs becomes a day that the left-behind parents, whatever that number is on that day, is a day of mourning, because it is more likely that the door just slammed right in their face. So if you could speak to that as well.
We have explored a variety of options, and we just want to underscore, and when in diplomacy, when you say you're not going to take something off the table, there's a very clear intent associated with that, and I just would like to stand by that, if I may. I do think we are starting to get a critical mass, both inside the Japanese government, certainly in the U.S. government.
You didn't answer the question on that final question about the MOU.
Oh, yes, I will. We have had some discussions. From the Japanese perspective, it's a complete non-starter. And the key here is the letter U, understanding it requires a degree of partnership and engagement on the Japanese side. Their view is that we are addressing this according to your concerns. You've asked us to work on the issues associated with Hague. We've indicated that we need to see progress on existing cases. But on this particular issue, they're not prepared to go down this path. They said, look, we're better to focus on these other matters. And I think in many respects.
But again, Mrs. Secretary, too, and Dr. Campbell, what is our position? Is it our position to push for an MOU and a bilateral agreement?
If we could get an agreement with the Japanese government to return these children, we would have gotten it. We would have sought it years ago.
But are we pushing for that agreement at the highest levels? I know we pushed for Hague, and kudos for that. But again, the day they sign is a bittersweet day for the left-behind parents, because by definition, They are excluded because it is all from date of entry into force onward, and the door closes behind them.
Yeah,
I mean, the idea is that the Japanese should say all in. We're all in. We mean it. And it's a test of their sincerity, frankly.
I think we have always pursued two tracks, both of which are incredibly important. One was getting these children returned to the United States, and the other is Hague. And we're not going to give up on getting the children back to the United States. And we'll figure out a way to do it.
In some cases, we have clear-cut violations of the law. Now, I understand you're not the FBI, but I'm going to submit some specific questions, both about extradition and about visa revocation for people who've been involved. But I would suggest, too, Mr. Chairman, I think probably this is a inter-committee thing, and I think it would probably be useful if this subcommittee, which has been the leader in this, would be to talk to our colleagues at Judiciary and have a joint confidential briefing of those of us who are interested. And let's pursue the case of extradition. Let's pursue the case of visa revocation. That is, I understand I'm not going to get public answers because I'm talking about some punitive actions against individuals. But I would be glad to participate. I'm sure our colleagues in Judiciary would, and we would ask for a private briefing so we would have no holds barred. And I would just want to put people on notice. I want to know, who are you trying to extradite, and why not, if not? And what about visas, and what about other very specific sanctions? Mr. Chairman and Mr. Payne, thank you very much for accommodating me.
We would welcome that opportunity, sir.
The truth is we've made clear to Japanese colleagues and friends that we're going to look carefully at all avenues, and that they need to understand the urgency, and that outrage is growing on Capitol Hill, indignation not just among the parents, but a much broader group of the American people and the electorate and in the executive branch. And they have a chance to do this under the right conditions, right? In the spirit of partnership, of the humanity, of a strong bilateral relationship. But ultimately, I come down where Congressman Frank indicates, that in a case where the clear-cut needs of American families come to play, then we're going to have to take a very hard look.
This is a festering sore that will only grow, and I hope the Japanese government understands it. I mean, we are close friends and allies, but this is a human rights abuse against American children and American left-behind parents. I will continue to push hard for the H.R. 1940, and it's a matter of when and not if that I believe we will get that enacted. And I say that because there needs to be a penalty phase. Friends don't let friends commit human rights abuses, well, whether it be human trafficking, religious freedom, or any other abuse. This is, you know, as the Hague Convention and its genesis shows clearly, parental abduction is child abuse. It hurts the child more than anyone else, injures the left-behind parents, but it hurts the child. And I know you know that, and I know you know that well. But I do believe there needs to be a penalty phase at some point for a country, ally or not, that continues its obstinacy with regards to this. So I would ask you to I'm not sure who has made the decision to accept no as no, but if the Secretary of State, if President Obama, if you, who deal with this issue every day, could work it to try to turn that no to a yes for a bilateral agreement. Otherwise, I have a sense of fright, and I talked, like you, to the left-behind parents. They sense that when that door closes, it will not create an atmosphere that will resolve the older cases. They will be grandfathered in as older cases, cold cases that don't get resolved. There may be an exception somewhere, but I think human nature being what it is, time and delay is denial. Those children will grow. They will be, you know, they will be 21, 30, who knows what it will be. They'll get to see mom or dad then, but these are these years that are irreplaceable. So I ask you, please, push for that bilateral agreement, special court, call it whatever you want, or whatever modality you choose, but there needs to be a process and an agreement between our two countries. And otherwise, there needs to be a penalty phase. And because they're getting away with abduction.
I don't think the door is ever closed to trying to reach an agreement on this. I think there are a number of ways that we can try to do it. One of them is in changes in Japanese domestic law that they will need to make anyhow in order to ratify the convention, and we can encourage them to include the older cases in this ratification.
But again, I would hope that President Obama would talk to the Prime Minister and say, solving these cases, and it will take, I think, a mechanism. It won't happen just by saying the wave of the arm or the wand. So make that, you know, his major talking point in his next meeting.
Every single possible thing we're doing right now, we are doing, at least at my lowly level, I am doing.
And as you know so well, every day of continued unlawful retention is another day of abuse.